Welcome to the Kolbe Cast, episode 71. Glad you could join us. Today, Bonnie and I are joined by Chris Lewis of Baritus Catholic Illustrations and the creator of Kolbe's Mary and Max image. In today's episode, we discuss with Chris the longing that man has for beauty and how a new renaissance is developing in Catholic art. We also get to hear how Chris developed his style of art, a style that is masculine, reverent, current, and realistic. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Kolbe homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
Perhaps you've taken notice of the new artwork featuring our Blessed Mother and St. Maximilian Kolbe that now graces the Kolbe Academy website and social media channels. Today, we get to meet the artist who created that image, Mr. Chris Lewis of Baritus Catholic Illustration, whom you may have seen on the KolbeCast Convention Finale Facebook Live this past summer. Welcome, Chris, to the KolbeCast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate the chance to get to come and hang out with Kolbe again, Kolbe Academy, and talk about the faith and art. That's great.
We're very happy to get to visit with you. Got Stephen Hayden here with me to visit with you again today. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Bonnie. Hi, Chris. It's a
Hi.
pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've been enjoying seeing this new artwork of Mary and Max, as we sometimes refer to it, of our Blessed Mother and St. Maximilian Kolbe. We see it lots of places, and I smile every time I see it. It has this quality to it that I really very much like, and I don't really have better words to describe it beyond that most of the time. But I would love to hear how it came to be. Was there already a vision in mind when you started collaborating with Kolbe on its creation, or how did that go?
Yeah, sure. So I actually was good friends with a fellow parishioner here in the Atlanta area, and she had been doing some design work for Kolbe, and so she kind of got me introduced to Kolbe Academy to work on a few illustrations for some republications that they were doing. And in that process, it came up, well, maybe we should reapproach the old Kolbe illustration that was on the back of the books. And it was like a royalty-free sort of public domain image that had been used for forever. And we were looking at that and thinking, okay, it's such a great image, but maybe it does need just a little bit of a refresh for audiences today who might be able to engage with it in a new way. So we really didn't want to reinvent that too much. We really wanted to keep the beauty of it because it was a beautiful image. It just could use a little bit of update. And so we really went with that direction of just improving upon the general look and aesthetic of it. But it still represents the story and the vision that St. Maximilian Kolbe had of our Blessed Mother, and being offered the 2 crowns, the one of purity, the one of martyrdom. And so for me, when I looked at this image, the one thing I did change was I believe St. Kolbe was staring into Mary's face in the original image, and I wanted him almost like prayerfully considering these 2 crowns and sort of tucked into her embrace a little bit. So she's kind of like enveloping him in a way. And so there's just this loving relationship there that I wanted to express, as many people who know about St. Maximilian Kolbe will know, is he had a great devotion to our Blessed Mother, and so that was really something I wanted to make sure came across in this update.
You have accomplished that quite effectively. It sure is beautiful. At the very beginning of our relaunched KolbeCast, we released a very brief episode telling the story of Kolbe Academy's patron saints, including St. Maximilian Kolbe and St. Ignatius of Loyola. That's episode 2, Patron Saints, which we will link in the show notes to hear just a very quick story of those 2 saints and why they are special to Kolbe Academy. So for listeners curious about that who didn't catch it the first go round, that's available to you. So would you tell us a bit about Baratus and the story behind the formation of your company?
Sure. I have been in art and design in some kind of way for the last at least 20 years, probably more, because I kind of started out as a teenager. But I professionally went into graphic design, and I did that for about 17 years. And on and off, as sort of a spare time hobby, I would come home from work and, I kind of had this creative motivation to express myself through illustration. I really considered myself an illustrator for most of my life, but I wasn't getting that outlet through my career. So I would come home and I would start working on things, and this was at a point in my life when I was extremely inspired by the faith. I had a big spiritual conversion, and so I started just illustrating concepts based on the faith. And as I started doing this, I thought, this is something I should probably brand and give it a name, and just start using this as a creative outlet. And so anybody who's been in marketing will know that it is extremely difficult to find original names that have not been taken in some way, or that somebody isn't using. So I've always said it's kind of a blessing that we have the Catholic faith, that we have the second language of Latin. So
Yeah.
I started going back to the Latin, and I'd actually been reading this history about the ancient Roman Empire and how they would go to battle against the barbarians towards the later part of the Roman Empire. And as they would approach these people coming across the borders, they would run across their war cry, which was called the Baritus. And they called it that because it was like the sound of like blowing trumpets or like an elephant.
Mm.
And so when I started thinking about it, I liked the name a lot. And I started thinking about just the connotations of, you have warriors here, you have this trumpet sound tied into the name. And I started to recall images of like Revelations or the fall of Jericho when Joshua and his army came into the Holy Land. And so I started to put these things together, and it sort of took on a different sort of meaning in my head. But I really liked it, and I was fortunate enough that nobody had been using it. And it kind of tied together also symbolically this idea I had in my head of not only proclaiming the truth, but also defending the truth, which is something we really need in this culture today. And so the idea of the warrior and the trumpet became symbols. So the trumpet is proclaiming the truth, and then the sword is defending the truth. And so that's wrapped up in the logo, and that's really kind of how it was born. And it's been a blessing to be able to do that work. It is a little bit hard for people to understand what it is, so I kind of tag it with Catholic illustration in addition to Baratus, just so people do realize this is a Catholic project or ministry.
When I was first saw the Marion Max logo, they told me that you had worked on that through them. So I had to go on right away and Google and get to your website. I have several young boys, and I love how you can capture something that's masculine and very reverent and modern as well. I mean, not modern in a bad way, but how did you develop that sort of the style that you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the modern thing is funny. Whenever I talk to people, they'll say it's almost modern, but not in a bad way. So I think everybody has that hesitation to say that, but I'm fully on board with that. What I try to do is represent the traditional legacy of the Catholic Church, but do it in a modern way that actually appeals and resonates with people today. So it's traditional while at the same time also sort of a modern aesthetic to it. And I come from a long line of military in our family, and they fought in many wars throughout our previous generations. My dad was in the Gulf War, and so I kind of grew up with this love of or respect or this honor of military traditions and military history. And so I've always I've been attracted to war movies, and I love the Old Testament for all of its epic battles. And so it's just kind of been a part of my growing up that I've just gravitated towards that more masculine side of the faith. And it's actually kind of funny. I've never really thought about it too much. I kind of just started drawing what came naturally to me, and people started commenting on the fact that, wow, this is really masculine compared to what I've been seeing. And it did make me think for a minute, and I was like, okay, well, yeah, we do have a lot of like prayer cards with like blushing saints and things like that, which I love that stuff too. It has like a nice, beautiful vintage quality to it. But I can see how something a little bit more masculine or that appeals to the strong side of our faith could appeal to people these days. I also say that it kind of has a little bit of a gritty edge because things in the Catholic faith are not always pristine. This is a struggle and a war against sin, essentially. There is that side of it too, and so I try to make it realistic and true and inspiring and hopeful and strong. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I had just been finishing a consecration to Saint Joseph when I had done this and looked at some of your illustrations of Saint Joseph and thinking, yeah, this is the sort of guy who's going to just wake up from a dream and take his family all the way across the wilderness, on foot, to a foreign land at the drop of the hat, just in obedience. And I just thought, yes, this is capturing the manliness of Saint Joseph that I want to see right now. So
Yeah,
I really
that's
appreciate
exactly it. That's right. I grew up in a house with two brothers, so there wasn't a lot of femininity in the house. It was just like pure aggression and like, conflict. And so I guess that kind of shaped me a little bit and probably comes out of my art as well.
So that's interesting then that you find an outlet in art, in that coming from that background, that art is your outlet that way.
Yeah, there's actually a kind of funny story about that. My dad was a Marine, and his dad was in the Army, and so it got to be time to try and decide what I was going to do for a career. And he's like, "So what do you think you want to do with your life?" And I said, "I think I want to be an artist." And I don't know, he doesn't seem to remember this. I remember it, but he's like, "That's not a job."
Oh, oh.
But he came from a different reality, I guess. And
Mhm.
so that part of it was hard. I also am blessed to have kind of come up at a time when technology was really changing. So in his mind, I could see how being an illustrator or graphic designer didn't seem like it was going to be very lucrative, especially taking care of a family. But things have changed so much. I mean, that's one of the things I can credit to the growth of Baratus, is that social media really helped that and getting the exposure out. And I think it allowed me to be able to put this work in front of people, and then in a widespread way internationally, and people were all able to see something from this little tiny place in Atlanta. And it's a big help for artists because it does give us this outlet that we can really reach the world in a new way.
I'm a little curious about that. I mean, it seems to me there's a real need for Catholic organizations, for somebody like you to really help them show whether they have an idea or putting something together that's respectful and beautiful, but also says something about their organization. How challenging is that to kind of work with somebody and to kind of understand what it is they're trying to say, and then you expressing it through your art?
There are challenges sometimes, but I mean, it's something that I really was exposed to for 17 years doing corporate graphic design. Graphic design is really problem solving. So it's really understanding what the problem or what the objective is and then trying to solve for it visually. And so as long as, you're able to understand the story that a client's trying to give you, or a purpose or a goal that they're trying to achieve. I'm somebody who kind of does, at least in the illustration work, the way I draw and the way that I portray images and things, it really is what it is. It's just naturally that's how it comes out. And so I'm finding it that a lot of people are coming to me for that. And so it's a little bit easier because they know what to expect. And then it's just about me kind of understanding, what the story they want to tell is. And then I try to just cater to that as much as possible to make that clear.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like even on your website where you've got the different images. I mean, so like a logo sort of with the sword and the trumpet there, and then bringing those images and tying them in. And again, it's something I don't do easily, so it's impressive.
I try and make this point that illustration, graphic design, these things are really about storytelling. And I try to make that apparent in the art. Like I don't want to just draw a saint and kind of let it be. I try and tell a story with it. So even the Max and Kolbe, to go back to that for a minute, I mean, has all the elements of the story, but it's worked into one single composition. And it's those little elements that you see in it that kind of pique the interest and open your heart to try and understanding what this story is and what it's trying to tell you. And so it's a great opportunity, especially in the Catholic art. It's so great because there's so many symbols that you can just put into this stuff, and you can kind of lead people on this journey of really going deeper. Because the point of this art is it really is supposed to open people up to experiencing the higher things, the things of God, the transcendentals. And so, yeah, there's a lot of ways you can tell these stories with symbols and things to try and really engage people. So not so easy when you're designing for products in the secular market. It's you have to concoct this made up story or made up narrative. Whereas with the Catholic world, I'm just retelling what's been given to us. I'm trying to do that as authentically as possible.
Well, it's very effective.
Yes.
Recently, we had the pleasure of seeing a lot of really great artwork from Kolbe students. The subject being St. Maximilian Kolbe. There was an art contest recently. I would love to hear more of the story behind that. You had a hand in that, right?
Yeah, it was a blessing. They came to me, Colby Academy came to me and asked me to be one of the judges, which of course I was more than honored to do. I know as a kid myself, I really loved any opportunity to draw or enter into a contest where I could kind of like test my creativity and my skills. And so it was so great to see so many young people that were open to doing this and sharing their talents and doing it in a Catholic way. I had actually just done a personal art competition for young people myself, like just a few weeks before that. So to see so many young people who are really embracing these talents that God's given them and being able to do it in a way that's actually positive is is beautiful. And I mean, I told the other judges that this was probably one of the hardest things I've had to do.
Yeah.
I mean, to sit there and look at 20 something pieces of just really well done artwork that are expressing their love for St. Colby and try and make a decision about the best one. I mean, it was nearly impossible. And they were all so great that it was really quite inspiring to see that.
They are really neat. You can see examples of them. Some of the winners are on the Colby Facebook page and Instagram feed as well on both those. So listeners can go and see the winners of the art contest. Here in the past few years, Colby has started offering a number of new art courses. There are live online art classes offered through the online academy and also courses for middle and high school that students signed up for this year. They have access to, and I think they do it in elementary school as well. So there's more in the way of art instruction offered to Colby students. It's neat to be able to see it all come together and have this interaction with you. And what would you offer by way of advice for aspiring artists now that they've had this opportunity to try their hand at this art contest?
Yeah, the biggest thing I would say is don't give up. Really, everybody's an artist in some way, and I think people underplay this. They discredit the talent that everybody really does have for something creative. I mean, it's a natural expression of the creativity of God. It kind of comes out through the things that we create, and so definitely keep that up. One of the things I tell young people is make a habit of drawing every day. Like I went to it naturally, but you're always going to have days where it's just like, oh, you're not feeling it. Make yourself do it at least for like 15 to 20 minutes a day. Get a little sketchbook and start to fill it up. And I think over time, just building that habit, you'll be amazed when you start to go back to previous sketchbooks how much you just grow in that. I read a book one time about a artist who would go around to schools and talk about art and creativity. And he would always ask people at like kindergarten, like, who here wants to be an artist? And like the entire class would raise their hand. And he would see that as he'd go up through the older grades, by the time you get to like seventh and eighth grade, who here wants to be an artist? Like maybe one or two people are like shyly raising their hand. And he felt this was a sort of a detriment because people had given up on this love they had for creating, and it's tucked in there with everybody somewhere. And so I think everybody needs this expressive creative outlet in some way, whatever it is: cooking, music, writing, uh, photography. It really is good for the soul, I think. And so I would definitely encourage these kids to keep it up. um, if you have days where you're struggling on things, keep at it. Those journals, those sketchbooks will really help you in that and help you progress. And I know when I was young, I would always, if I had to draw hands or feet or like faces in sort of a different perspective or something, it was like terrifying. It's like I can't do it, but because those are the most challenging things for young artists to eventually learn. But um, make yourself do it. It's going to be, it might be a little rough going at first, but you'll start to see over time. You'll get used to it, and look at everything around you. Look at the world around you. Look at the way that figures were painted during the Renaissance, or look at Renaissance art and kind of get a understanding of that. I would just encourage all of that as much as possible. I mean, it's I really think, especially the way the culture is these days, we consume so much. We consume so much video content, audio content, but most of it's really toxic. And so I'm all about encouraging young creative people like these kids that entered this art contest to keep it up because we need you more than anything. Both the last Pope Benedict, Pope John Paul II, they both issued letters to artists, really encouraging them to keep this up because the world has lost hope, and art is a good way to bring hope back to the world and lead people to God. And so, yeah, definitely keep it up.
Yeah, how do you think we're doing at that? I mean, I remember back in like the late 90s with Notre Dame with Duncan Stroik bringing back classical architecture and this beauty that they were starting to try to recapture. But with respect to art itself, do you think we're doing well with that, or a lot of work still? What?
Yeah, I think a number of years ago, I probably would have said it's looking pretty bleak. Even church architecture and things, it's looking, we could do better. We can do better. I mean, there's no shortage of creative people. And so I was kind of scratching my head and I thought, why are these people not going into religious art? Why are they going into secular art? And, in the secular world, you're not going to build, works of beauty like the way we used to 100 years ago with Catholic cathedrals and things or before that. But I have to say, this new world of social media has kind of opened me up to how many people there are out there doing these things, and I think it is starting to gain a little bit of traction. And I almost sense, and maybe I'm optimistic here, but I almost sense sort of like this new renaissance happening. And I feel like we're just at the beginnings of it. But I think this mixture of the fact that people are longing for beauty again, especially in our churches, even in our cities. That's another thing, but everywhere, everybody's longing for beauty, and I think there's more and more artists now that are being exposed to other people doing it. And I think it's becoming an encouragement for other people to join in, and I do get the sense that it's growing. And I think that we all get the sense that something's missing. You drive down the typical American city street, and it's not inspiring. You go into a lot of the newer parishes that were built in the last 50 years or so, and it's 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 disappointing because we used to do so much better at that. But I do sense that because people are sensing that longing, they're starting to ask for it, and that's what it really takes. Because in during the Renaissance, it was the church who was really building studios and paying for these works of art and being patrons of the arts and encouraging artists to revitalize the church. And we've kind of lost that now, and now it's become more on the private individuals and Catholic mass goers that we're kind of looking around and saying, no, we want this again. And but there isn't the church there backing it, so it's like we're going to need to find support within the Catholic community, and hopefully it inspires a true renaissance at some point.
Well, certainly, I'm happy to hear that, and it's when I see the work that you're doing, I think here's the connection now. There can be something that's currently being done. I don't have to go back several hundred or years to try to find something that's beautiful and speaks to my faith and my love of our Lord. So, yeah, very encouraged by what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. One of the challenges is, where does a Catholic artist go these days to sort of learn the skills that the Renaissance artists learned, or to understand how to sculpt or how to build architecture in the way that they used to. Um, as an illustrator, you go to art school these days, and a lot of times that you're not getting that. You're
Mhm.
getting, how do we tear things down and disfigure art. We're not getting, how do we build art up? How do we make it beautiful again? How do we restore these things that? And that's the thing with Catholic art. We're not really here to be inventive. We're here to just to pass on those traditions and that legacy that we have, and just expose people to it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I had this sort of sinking feeling that when you look at the mass attendance numbers, and it can be a little bit bleak, and you think, wow, there's a lot of people who aren't even stepping into a Catholic church anymore. How do we inspire them to come back in? And I think beauty is a great way to do it. And that's one of the reasons why I try and I decided not to necessarily go the route of building up parishes and creating art for parishes. I'm trying to take art out into the streets, out into the public, because I want more Catholic art and I want more of it everywhere.
Great. You were bringing up the schools or education that's talking about that, and it come up in my mind a little bit earlier with architecture. I know there's at one point there was this great connection with Vitruvius and such, with mathematics and proportion and geometry and looking at all of these things. Now, did did you get some elements of that still in your graphic design art, or is that something that just kind of comes natural to you? Because I can see elements of it, but it seems like it is hard for our kids to get that sort of, that there is, the beauty can be I mean, it can be felt and just known when you see it, but there's also order built
Hmm.
in beauty.
There is. I didn't get it necessarily through architecture, but I did. It's the same principles in graphic design. So the Fibonacci sequence. It's basically the golden ratio where you start to break things into thirds, and there's sort of that balance is worked into good and beautiful art, and because it's harmonious, and so a lot of those same techniques that they use in architecture are also applied to graphic design, and so there is that, which if you don't learn it in school, you at least you learn it on the job because
Mhm.
you start to see that it works, and it becomes secondhand nature. So I think that was more of the case for me. I unfortunately I don't know that, I don't want to sound too down on art schools, but it's, I think a lot of the experience and the skill you get is really on the job solving problems, and yeah, I didn't get so much of that in school, unfortunately. But I did go late, and I did kind of force it into 2 years, in order to put my foot in the door in the corporate world. But
Well, sounds like something we can start building on, whether it's starting in Colby or or
that's right.
Mhm.
you're
That's
getting some
right.
of these good Catholic schools to work on that as well. It
Right.
sounds like something we need to get to work on.
Definitely. One of the things with modern art is it's really taken down the path of how do we dismantle that mathematical balance and the harmonious beauty that we used to work into art and architecture. And it's become about how do we take that apart and distort it. And unfortunately, a lot of this has even crept up into the building of parishes. But I was reading St. Benedict's letter to artists the other day, and instead of art being used to shock people, which is what it's turned into, artists for the last 100 years have been thinking, okay, how can I shock somebody with something novel, with something new, with something that you know challenges their sensibilities or what they always thought art was. But I was reading Saint Benedict and Saint Benedict, Pope Benedict the 16th. um, not yet, not yet.
Right.
So yeah, I was reading him, and he quoted Plato, and Plato said that true beauty was a healthy shock. And so there is that sense that where we are, so, there is a shock to beauty when you come across, a beautiful sunset. It kind of like takes your breath away. Well, that's just natural inherent beauty. Well, the same thing works with the works of art that we create. It should really be about shocking beauty, beauty that takes our breath away and encourages us to seek more. Now, imagine what would happen if you gave a sunset to a modern artist. I mean, they would just they would make it an absolute mess. Nobody's ever walked away from a beautiful sunset repulsed. They've sensed that there was something in there that's transcendental, and those same things, same transcendental qualities, work in the art that we produce as well. And so I think there is a need to return to that and remember the purpose of art is to draw us into something much deeper. And it's a search. I mean, it's really creativity and creating art is a search. And it's a search for God ultimately at the end of it.
It's really magnificent that I hadn't really thought about that too much until like a year or two ago when I was at a kind of a retreat where I was talking about how people can bring the Holy Spirit to other people through gifts that God gives them. And I hadn't really thought about that with art, but they were talking about how musicians and artists, oftentimes God works through them to have the Holy Spirit move in the people who either see or listen. And thinking back after hearing that, it's some of the experiences I've had have been with religious art or music in particular, like seeing a statue of the Pieta at one point in a museum was almost just brought me to tears immediately, even though I've just been looking at all sorts of other art. I wasn't in a particular some of the
It's interesting you mentioned Austria. That my first trip to Europe was to Vienna, and we stayed at a little hotel around the corner from St. Stephen's Dome. And I can remember just walking around that corner and just like frozen.
Yes.
Like, what is this? There is nothing like this that I've ever seen here in this country. And it's almost as if the thing came from heaven itself. I mean, it's just spectacular, unbelievable. And the same thing happens in Rome. You walk the streets of Rome, it's like every corner you turn, and you're just like stopped dead in your tracks looking at this masterpiece of architecture. And there's 120 of something churches within Rome itself. I mean, every corner you're walking into another chapel, and it's just like, this is the paradise I want to live in. Because it points to the true paradise in heaven, and that's what this is supposed to do. It's supposed to orient us towards that true paradise and that true end. And you see works of art done like that, and it really accomplishes that mission perfectly. And you can't, it impresses a reaction on you. Like you don't even, you can't even process really that reaction. It comes naturally just by seeing it, and that's what true beauty does. Is it impresses itself on you.
And what a way! I mean, if you could, I can't even imagine what, like, the cathedral, the St. Stephen's, is that
St.
in
Stephen's
Vienna?
Dome, yeah. Hmm.
St. Stephen, when you see that, I can't imagine what would happen if you plopped that down in an American city. When, how we talk about the Catholics kind of fleeing the church or not showing up, I think everybody would be showing up to a cathedral like that just to see the wonder of it, whether they're Catholic or not. And if you can get them in the door, hopefully you could you could keep them, right?
That's such an amazing thing. I was blessed to travel through Europe quite a bit, and so you go to these cathedrals that are just hundreds of years old and just magnificent. And unfortunately, they're more of a tourist stop for people. Now, I say unfortunately because I'm sure at some point in time there were just masses happening constantly, and they were just packed. Well, they're packed now with tourists, which not in a sense is not necessarily a bad thing. We're living on a linear timeline. These people are experiencing things in real time, and so they're stepping into these cathedrals, and hopefully there's seeds being planted there that they start to question, or they start to see some of the ugliness around us in everyday, urban development, and they start to think, I have a longing for that thing I saw in Europe. And so it's that little tugging that I think that those churches will eventually impart upon people, and it does. I've heard stories of people. I was watching Journey Home one time, and this man stepped into an old, ancient Roman church and was pretty much converted on the spot just by beauty. It can happen, and it does happen, and I think it speaks to these people who are searching. And yeah, I hope we start to get back to a point where we put those in the middle of our cities, and the cities build up around the cathedrals the
Yes.
way they used to.
It certainly highlights the importance of and the space for current artists such as yourself, adding to the wealth of sacred art that we have over the past several hundred years. But now the current artists like you, like bringing people in who might not otherwise be in the way of it, so to speak. Like in making use of social media as you do, where they might be scrolling and they land upon one of your images, and then that is a game changer for them. Even that small seed, as you referred to with the tourists visiting the various cathedrals, just to see them. But who knows what happens that they might not recognize at the time.
That was actually an impetus for me to create Catholic goods that people could sort of take with them on their journeys. So, I make stickers and magnets and apparel and things because one of the things when I would travel Europe or any U.S. city, um, you step outside of those churches and you see the graffiti and the street poles that are just littered with stickers of just all kinds of terrible art and messaging. I was thinking about this really recently that I think the way cities become sort of like these hotspots of sin is just because we're all around each other, and the ugliness and the sin that we're so packed in, and we don't have that space to like breathe or like take. The churches aren't there on every corner the way they used to, and so we don't get that grace from God and that moment of peace and silence to really reflect on something higher. We're always just constantly surrounded by the sin and ugliness. And so this really started inspiring me, and I thought, in some way, we got to start getting these images out in public to counter this stuff. Like, I don't want people seeing this stuff all day long. I want people to be behind me in traffic and reading something beautiful on my bumper sticker. I don't want them to be seeing some hideous message the way that I'm seeing constantly these days. And so, yeah, that was really an inspiration for me to sort of take the beauty that we used to see in the Catholic Church and take it out to the world in some way that, I don't know, gives people hopefully a momentary break to look at something that gets their mind on God and away from all of the ugliness. So yeah, it's one of those things. I would leave the church, and you just confront that as you're walking down the streets, and try and make my way to the next church as quick as possible, like in Rome or something, and go in there as a shelter. Um,
Right.
and one of the things about another thing about Rome is they have these beautiful street shrines. So you'll be walking down just your average street, and they'll just have a Marian shrine there, built into the building, like as a part of the structure. And I was kind of thinking remorsefully the other day, talking to my wife, and I was like, how much I would love to just drive down the street we always drive down and look over and see a Marian shrine.
Hmm.
Well, we're not there yet, but maybe putting more stickers or something that people are carrying around with them, or wearing a shirt that is actually speaking to people and evangelizing. At least I can do that small thing. So
Well, now this is tying back for me at the beginning when you're talking about your conversation with your father about, that's not a real that's not a
yeah,
real job or whatever.
yeah,
And it's so encouraging to think that I mean, as you're setting an example, I guess, that it can be done. You can,
again,
if you have a passion for this, and that's so encouraging because I know when I was growing up, certainly in high school, thinking about colleges, it was kind of like, yeah, you could go for your art degree, but you're not going to make any
right.
money. You're going to be struggling for the rest of your life. It's good. It's really refreshing to hear that maybe we can get more of these young Catholic artists who love what's beautiful and can support a family still with
Yeah.
that. That's hopefully we'll see more of that.
Yes, God willing, God willing. That for me. It was one of those things where I was doing secular work, all day long, and then I'd come home and really have this time for Catholic work that I really loved doing in it. And the more and more I was doing it, the more I felt something lacking in the secular work, and I really wanted to do something that had purpose and meaning beyond just bringing the paycheck home for the family. But I wasn't sure how that was going to work, and I was quite nervous about, leaving behind 17 years to step out and try and do it. But thanks be to God, and this just goes back to what we were saying earlier. I think Catholics are really hungering for it because I can't do it without the support. The church isn't funding this anymore. It's just the average everyday Catholic in the pews that's doing it. And so far, God, it's been such a blessing, and God has blessed this project, and it's happening, and I'm at a point where I realize that, yeah, this is something that people need and they want, and it's a blessing to be able to do it.
Well, it sure is great to see the proliferation of contemporary Catholic art in the more pragmatic spheres of life, that we can find home goods that are beautiful and speak to our faith, draw our attention to the aspects of our faith that are right there in our visual landscape, doing whatever our everyday things are that could be almost mindless, or whatever it is that we can draw our minds heavenward with some visual representations of that in the goods that we use in the service of our families day to day.
I highly encourage putting a piece of sacred art in every room of the house. I grew up Protestant, and I eventually rejected that and went towards a path of atheism for many years until I discovered Catholicism. And when I met my wife and would go to her mother's house, it was the first time in my life I'd seen a house just like covered, room to room,
Yeah.
with religious imagery. And I can't help but think all the time I spent in that house, before I converted, was really, this goes back to what we've been saying. It was speaking to me, and it was getting me to search deeper, and it felt like home, and it felt like Jesus and Mary. These are people that I deep down do know. So I've taken that practice into our own house now, and we put something in every single room in the house because I want to be able to be reminded of it as I'm going from room to room. I don't want this just to be a utilitarian place where I just, eat and sleep and do all the stuff that I need to do. I want it to be a sacred space where we work on striving for holiness. And images are a great way to encourage that.
When you can set up your home that way, at least in my experience, sometimes my eye will providentially land on something that I need to see right about
Yeah,
then that helps me
exactly.
kind of reorient and get back on track. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So I was excited to see recently Philip Campbell, who wrote the Story of Civilization series for TAN books. That one we have used the audiobook form as a companion to our upper elementary and middle school history studies, the Kolbe studies that we use with the Catholic Textbook Project. We listen to the audiobook versions of the Story of Civilization when we're out driving around, or as an ancillary piece to the textbooks to kind of supplement a little bit. So I've been paying attention to him for a long time. Saw that he has a new book coming out, and your artwork is on the cover. So congratulations, that's very exciting. I'm really curious to hear what the process is like when you're working with authors on to develop a new book when it's not in the process in the production process.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That was a great project to work on. I love history myself, and so um, a funny little story. I was actually talking with a publisher that said, your work would be great on these Philip Campbell books. And it just so happened, like that day, Philip reached out to me about doing a cover for this new book.
Oh, neat.
So I was like, well, this must be divinely inspired. So yeah, I was
Hmm.
I was thrilled to be able to take that project on, and of course, he's bringing attention to a figure who's not getting the best attention in the popular culture these days. And I do think it's important to protect our Catholic heritage and our identity, and remind, like, this is not a book about Jesus. This is not a, you know we're human and we have flaws, and so we can debate those things, but the great things that Catholics have done in the world, I mean, it needs to be recognized and it needs to be understood by our children. And so I was happy to see that he was working on this book, and I was glad to take on the project, and we wanted to keep it really focused on, he's the title of the series is the Heroic Catholics of America. And so we really wanted that image to be something heroic or inspirational. And it was no small thing what he set out to do. And I think that this is a story that, children should be inspired by. And so we kept the cover really sort of classic, really simple, and portrayed him as a heroic and intriguing figure that people would want to read about. Book covers tend to be, it's 50-50 sometimes, whether an author's like, I know I just have this really clear cut vision on what I want and it needs to speak to the story, and sometimes, it's free reign to run with it. And really, again, it's just about problem solving. And so if whatever that problem that the author is or is trying to communicate, or whatever that message they're trying to communicate is, it's just about solving for that. And this is one of those cases where Philip was pretty much just like, free reign, go for it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just almost immediately when he came to me, I just had that vision for it, and I really wanted it to be something classic. So that's kind of what I did.
We've collaborated with a number of authors. That's really neat, and they're listed on your website.
Yes.
Yeah, on the lookout for those.
Now, I know there's not really an answer to this for most people, but do you have kind of a favorite of some of the projects you've worked on, or pieces that you've done that you just thought, oh, this is what I was intending to do, and it's worked beautifully? Or is there any, or a number of them that stand out for you?
Yeah, it's one of those things where the projects or the ideas that sort of come to me out of nowhere, and inspiration just strikes like lightning, and I'll get this momentum behind me, and I'll sit down on the computer and 8 hours will go by and it feels like 30 minutes. Like, those are the projects where I'm just absolutely inspired to complete. And I've had a number of those. I mean, um, most of that just because of the fact that it's coming from inspiration that hits me, that was involved with a lot of my personal work. I mean, my favorite piece I've ever done. It's kind of funny because it's my favorite piece I've ever done, but I haven't finished it. And I think it's because I have such lofty ideals for it that it's like I'm just really taking my time with it. But Saint Peter has always resonated with me, just as a person who, faced challenges, and he kind of like backpedaled a little bit, and then he got his act back together, and he was faithful to Christ up until his own death. And I really kind of found him to be a really human and inspirational figure in the Gospels, and so I've kind of taken to him as a personal favorite saint. And so I did do a composition with him, sort of composed of all those symbols that I was talking about earlier that kind of represent his story. So, you know, he's holding his cross, the cross upside down, and he's got the fishing net like all wrapped around him as if he's tangled in it. And there's the skull at the bottom just as a symbol of the martyrdom to come. You know, he's holding the keys, and it has all these things, and it's a very masculine image. And it was a sketch I created, which I really hope to be able to finish one of these days. So that's probably like my top favorite piece, just because the whole image kind of popped into my head, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it, and the sketch at least came out to that degree. And that's on my Instagram page, probably way back. But yeah, I've really enjoyed all of these projects, and it's because they're Catholic and because it's Catholic work. I mean, I just love doing this stuff so much that it's truly a blessing, whether it's client work or personal work. I mean, I woke up the other day and told my wife, like, I can't believe that I get to work on Catholic projects all day long compared to last year where I was doing, product development for secular retail, and it's just like night and day. What these two worlds are like, and to be able to do something that means so much and is hopefully speaking to other people and encouraging other people. I mean, I don't know how I've become blessed to this degree, but thanks be to God for it.
Wow, it certainly sounds like, I mean, just as it sounds like the Holy Spirit is just working through you, and which is so phenomenal because, I mean, obviously there's a purpose that is so great for you. You're fulfilling your purpose, but it's out there for other people too, to be moved
Sure.
and yeah, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, you're an instrument. You're cooperating with that grace. You're
God willing, that's
being
right.
an instrument that way. Yeah. Well, we are delighted with our new logo. We have sure enjoyed our time visiting with you today. We will drop a link in the show notes, like I said, to the Facebook Live that you did with Jordan over the summertime. And listeners can get their own Mary and Max stickers in our Kolbe bookstore. We'll put a link to that in our show notes as well. Where else, though, can listeners find you and your artwork online?
Yeah, the place, I'm on all of the social media channels as at Baritus Catholic, and that's Baritus Catholic.
Okay.
Instagram is probably where I keep up the most, and that's where I tend to post the most recent work or previews of things I'm working on or reveal products I'm releasing. And then all my products are sold through my Etsy shop, so you can find me on Etsy as well. And of course, baratuscatholic.com will link to anything where I have some work or some kind of presence online.
Good deal. Well, we'll be looking for more beautiful things coming from you down the road. Sure, I've enjoyed our time visiting with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's been great.
If you haven't already, subscribe to the Kolbe Cast in your favorite podcast app for effortless episode delivery. And we'd love to hear from you, so drop us a line at podcast@kolbe.org. Mary our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.